Throughout history, there have been countless unexplainable stories, events, and moments captured on audio. These horrifying tapes were archived, never to be heard again. Until now. These are the tapes of trepidation. Tape number 64. My coworker was indestructible. Until very recently, I worked for a company that manufactures parts for large medical equipment. For my own anonymity, I'm gonna keep the details vague. All you really need to know is that I worked with big chunks of metal in a relatively small factory in the middle of nowhere. I've been in the metalworking field for quite a while at this point, and I've seen my fair share of industry accidents over the years. I've long since come to terms with the fact that an occasional gnarly gash or painful abrasion is par for the course in my line of work. In fact, almost all of my coworkers at the factory had endured some kind of minor injury in their career. All except one. One of my former coworkers was this guy called Lawrence. He was a loner, mid-30s, and quiet to the point of being antisocial. Although he didn't really engage with us other guys, he was pleasant enough. Never rude or anything like that, but not particularly friendly either. People still tried to joke around with him all the time, though mainly about the fact that he seemed to never get hurt, or even react to things that should be painful. It became a running joke of sorts that he was indestructible. I think people were trying to encourage him to socialize, but it ended up annoying him more than anything else. Generally, he tolerated the joke with a wry sort of glance. There was clearly some amount of truth to the joke, though. Lawrence would regularly touch burning hot metal or chemical irritants without so much as a flinch. It was impressive what he can endure, albeit concerning. The running gag was only reinforced when, about a year ago, Lawrence had an incident with the milling machine. He was using the thing as he usually did, with no personal protection whatsoever. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but a hunk of metal about the size, thickness, and shape of a tortilla chip flew up from the metal sheet he was cutting, and it made its way directly into his eye. He didn't yell in pain, nor was there any blood. He didn't even seem concerned or freaked out about his apparent eye trauma. It turned out he was completely fine. Not even a scratch. Apparently the shard had wedged itself perfectly between his eyeball and tear duct, miraculously avoiding cutting either his eye or face. In light of recent events, however, I'm not sure the explanation is entirely accurate. In the following months, Lawrence became more and more careless with his work. Not that he was doing a bad job, per se. The issue was that he was entirely ignoring safety guidelines. Evidently, he was always a little more lax when it came to that sort of thing, and he seemed to lack the self-preservation instincts that most people have. We would consistently remind him of the safety precautions, but he never really listened, claiming that it was easier to do the job without protective equipment. He was doing good work, so the higher-ups didn't really care if he broke a few guidelines. And nobody wanted to press the issue with him. I sincerely regret not making more of an attempt to intervene. I still struggle to wrap my head around what exactly happened to Lawrence that week. The things that I witnessed don't sound possible, even to myself. But I'll do my best to articulate the events of my last day working for the company. For the first 3/4 of my workday, absolutely nothing was amiss or even mildly out of the ordinary. It was a Wednesday. The project I was working on was unremarkable. I was on a bit of a time crunch due to some external factors going on in my life. I won't get into that here. So I decided to work late so I could finish up what I was doing ahead of schedule and have a bit more free time later. Lawrence apparently decided to work late, which wasn't surprising, as he did so somewhat often. As one might surmise based on his description, he wasn't really the type of guy to go out for some drinks with the boys. Instead of socializing, Lawrence was working a lathe. I assume the majority of people hearing this aren't very familiar with the types of machines used for large-scale metalworking. So allow me to give a highly condensed version of what exactly we're dealing with. A metal lathe is sort of like a potter's wheel for metal. A turning machine we use to cut, sand, and face metal. They allow us to cut metal extremely efficiently and symmetrically. And Lawrence stuck his hand in one. I have no idea why exactly he did so. I can only assume it was a careless mistake. The second his hand connected with the spinning rod of metal, he yelped in shock. Lawrence and I were the only two on that side of the factory. And I guess that means I was the only one beside him who saw the initial impact. I braced myself to be splattered with chunks of gore as my coworker was obliterated by an industrial machine. But the rain of blood, guts, and brain matter I was expecting never came. For an infinitesimal tiny fraction of a second, I thought maybe nothing had happened at all. But I looked back up and my ephemeral relief was replaced by horror and confusion. There was no blood, no screaming. Lawrence only looked confused. His arm was caught around the metal rod he was cutting. But instead of being violently ripped from his body or sucking him into the machine, it was stretching. It seemed like he was made of clay. Until I heard the stomach-churning pop sound of his shoulder being pulled from its socket as he stumbled forward. His arm had wrapped around the rod dozens and dozens of times, looking like a coiled spring. He had a look of panic on his face. I assume he must have been frozen in shock. But he finally started to scream. In what felt like 20 minutes, but was really only half a second. His arm seemed to run out of slack, and his body was pulled into the lathe. At least, his upper body was. His legs stood in place as his torso stretched at its midsection, joining his arm in the spring-like coil. His screaming faded after a few rotations, giving way to a gurgling, retching sound. A small amount of vomit leaked from his mouth, little droplets of it landing on the floor and the walls as his upper body spun in place. At this point, I finally came to my senses and rushed to try to turn the thing off. I didn't actually have to do anything, however, because by the time my initial shock had subsided, the backed up folds of Lawrence's skin and flesh had jammed the machine. I had no idea what to do from here. In my dazed state, I hadn't noticed the guys who were working on the other side of the factory floor had gathered around. Everyone had this look in their eyes like I'd never seen. This horrified, confused, glazed over look only present when one witnessed something beyond comprehension. I called the police, not able to fully explain what I'd just seen. I was probably babbling incoherently. The police arrived. They called who I assume was the FBI. The possibly FBI guys called someone else. Soon enough, Lawrence's body was being unwound from the piece of steel by government officials and carried away. I thought he was dead. He was making a sound. I thought it was agonal breathing, or some sort of death rattle. But when I saw his face, I knew he was trying to speak. He was fully conscious. The image of his eyes as they made contact with mine will be laser cut into my retinas forever. Needless to say, I quit my job. This has been tape number 64, My Coworker Was Indestructible, by the Tapes of Trepidation Horror Narration Podcast. My Coworker Was Indestructible was written by Tapewormreverie and was originally posted on the Creepypasta Wiki. Story is available on your Creative Commons by Share-alike license. Music for this episode was provided by ESN Productions, with a link to their YouTube channel in the show notes. Narration, production, and sound design for this episode was by TJ Hodder. The Tapes of Trepidation theme was written by the incredible J.M. Scherf. All logos, banners, overlays, and graphic design work was provided by the talented Jason Reese from Jaybird Digital Arts. If you have a story you would like to submit, or a question regarding the show, please contact us at tapesoftrepidation@gmail.com. Support the show by subscribing and leaving a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcatcher, or like and subscribe on YouTube. And be sure to tell your friends. Word of mouth is extremely helpful to a podcast like this one. Check us out on social media through the link tree in the show notes. We have Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. If you come join the Discord right now and let me know that you heard about the Discord through this episode outro right now as you were hearing this, tape number 64's, let me know when you enter the Discord and you'll win a prize. I'm serious. I'll give you a prize. Don't know what it will be, but we'll come up with something cool. If you'd like to support the show a little more, consider joining the Tapes of Trepidation Patreon, where for as little as $5 a month, you can gain access to monthly bonus short story / micropasta narrations, the weekly behind-the-scenes podcast within the archive, and more. Taking into consideration the behind-the-scenes podcast within the archive and all the bonus narrations, there are currently hundreds of episodes to dive into right now in the archives of the Tapes of Trepidation Patreon. That's hours of content. for $5 a month to dive into, and it's all evergreen. So, if you want to support the show, now is the perfect time to join. You're going to get a lot of content, and I always strive to give you guys as much as I can. So come, join us, and become trapped within the archive. Just like my current patrons, Neil Skarupa of Neurotic Voice, Doozer Pin Dan, Ronan Kumori, Eric Phones, Patrick Stewart, Madam Strangeways, and Dr. Torment. Thank you all so much for the support. All content used on Tapes of Trepidation is either original, used with permission, or is available under Creative Commons Share-alike license. All rights reserved, unless otherwise stated. Licensing information can be found in the show notes. This podcast and its content may not be redistributed or rebroadcasted without the express written consent of Tapes of Trepidation and the story's author. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm serious, by the way. If you join the Discord right now and tell me that you joined after hearing tape number 64's outro, I'll give you a prize. Maybe it'll have something to do with the Patreon. I don't know, who knows? Something to think about anyway.